to do, and then turn this over to Dr. Alan Mobley, who is the director of our Center for Transformative Justice.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's great to be here. It's great to be anywhere, and it's great to be here, both where I am at home, where things are pretty calm, and these days not too hot, not too cold, and also great to be here on Zoom with members of our community interested in what we're up to with the Center for Transformative Justice. So I asked several folks to come on with me and talk about our work. And given the time of year and the time of semester, some were able to make it, and some had to say next time. But for this time, we have a current SDSU student named Anthony Williams, who I don't know if he's made it onto the Zoom yet, but I imagine he will shortly, and a prospective SDSU student who's very active in the community, doing at least what I would call transformative justice work, and his name is Sean Khalifa. And so we'll be hearing from Anthony and from Sean a little later, and we'll also certainly open it up for your questions and comments, and perhaps more than questions and comments, your thoughts about the potential of the work of a Center for Transformative Justice, and what it might be able to do for our campus and the larger community. So the Center for Transformative Justice at SDSU is a relatively new center. I guess in the time of COVID, where it's so easy to lose track of time, I hardly remember if this is our first year or our second year. But I think for academic calendars, this is the second year. And really, it arose out of the work, at least on our campus, the work of Project Rebound. And you've probably heard of Project Rebound. It's our campus support program for formerly incarcerated students and justice involved and justice system impacted students. With Project Rebound, we go into state prisons and county jails and let the students inside know that we want them right out on our campus, to let them know that university education is obtainable for them, that they will have support and a support community when they're able to enter or to apply to enter SDSU, and that it's not just SDSU, that Project Rebound started at San Francisco State University in 1967. And it was started by a formerly incarcerated man who was a tenured professor there. He had gotten in trouble with the law, I think robbed a store early in life, and while incarcerated, got involved with the civil rights movement, 1967, right? So it was the early 60s when he was incarcerated. Got involved in civil rights discussions and the civil rights movement in the United States, which includes the movement for rights for incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. So when we think about the civil rights era in the US, certainly we think about the struggles of Black Americans. Here in California, we're probably more aware than most of the struggles of Brown Americans and Native Americans. But the women's movement, right, was very closely on the heels of what we know as the civil rights movement, and then other struggles of what could be called struggles for liberation were occurring around the same time, coming with that same energy. And the struggle for prisoners' rights and the rights of formerly incarcerated people were a part of this. So when John Irwin was on the prison yard, he began mixing with folks who he hadn't met before in life, people from other racial and ethnic backgrounds, people from different economic circumstances, and they actually had discussions and debates around civil rights. So some of the same conversations that were going on college campuses and many other venues out in the community were also taking place in prison. And believe it or not, at that time, California state prisons approved of prisoners coming together and discussing the issues of the day. They even saw that as something that could be very useful for rehabilitation of the inmates, and they called it bibliotherapy. And so there was an actual effort to stock libraries in prisons and get books to prisoners. People from out in the community were invited to send books in, and this infusion of learning and literature helped fuel discussions and debates of all sorts, including prison arts programs. But for our purposes here, more along the sociological and political front. So having been somewhat well versed and immersed in the hot issues of the day, John was released from prison, helped start what became known as the California Prisoners Union, to once again fight for the rights of prisoners and formerly incarcerated people. And then went to college at UCLA, got his bachelor's degree, got a doctorate from Berkeley, and then was hired on at San Francisco State as a sociologist and a penologist. And then very quickly thought, there aren't too many people like him, with his background there on campus. And so how to change that, and thus Project Rebound was born. So if you're around my age or anywhere near, you're probably aware that those decades between 1967 and now have not been kind on efforts to bring around prison reform, prisoner rehabilitation, or the rights of the incarcerated or the formerly incarcerated. Indeed, many would argue that many of our civil rights struggles have had a fairly uphill time during these intervening decades. So although many of us working at the CSU would have liked to see Project Rebound expand from San Francisco State to other campuses, there wasn't much support for that notion or much energy in the field to really think it was something doable until maybe 2005, 6, 7, 2010. And then something palpable began to happen. In California, the name of the Department of Corrections was changed from CDC, California Department of Corrections, to CDCR, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So it became part of the state ethos now to once again bring rehabilitation overtly into the criminal justice system. So it was like that in the 60s, right, and in the 50s, but it largely went away. 70s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s. But then there was this effort to bring it back. At around the same time, out here in the community, a movement around the term restorative justice was coming into popular use. And maybe you've heard of restorative justice. The restorative justice critique of the criminal justice system is basically something like this, that the criminal justice system responds to crime, responds to harm in our community by asking a couple of questions. Who was harmed and who did it? So most of the entire process of the judicial system is, bringing a defendant before the bench and then determining whether or not the person is guilty or innocent. So most all the resources, most all the energy is really focused on the defendant and determining innocence or guilt. And if it's innocence, which it is in some portion of the time, then the person is released. And if it's guilt, then once again, the system has this tremendous investment in dealing with that individual. And mostly, as it's been these last 4 or 5 decades, mostly in a punitive, harsh, punishing kind of way. An ethos that gave rise to laws like we currently have around California 3 strikes, where we think it's appropriate to give 25 to life sentences to people who've shown that they've violated the laws multiple times. So restorative justice says, well, what about the person who was harmed, right? What about the person who we commonly call the victim? Where are they in all of this? So as part of the restorative justice turn, DA's offices, prosecutors' offices across the state have been looking into offering victim services. And some DA's offices actually have victim services, including here in San Diego. And then in courts, and maybe you've seen this on TV, there's such a thing as a victim statement, and it's usually invited prior to the sentencing phase, or at the sentencing phase, but prior to when a judge hands down a sentence. And so there have been some efforts to attend to the needs of crime victims or those who are harmed by crime. But for the most part, it's still very out of balance. And so the restorative justice system is trying to, well, it's not a system, but the restorative justice movement and the ethos of restorative justice is trying to bring these together, make it a more equitable investment on the part of the public and the justice system in attending to the needs of those who are harmed, as well as those who have caused harm. And as I'm saying, the needs of those who have caused the harm were not well attended to in prior years, but in the last several years, with restorative justice becoming more popular, and with the R for rehabilitation joining into CDCR, now there is more of an actual interest in attending to the needs of people who have caused harm and who are incarcerated in our state prison system. And so here we have the situation where now, under restorative justice ethos, we're asking, how is it that we can make a person who's been harmed by crime whole? How is it that we can attend to the needs or the deficits of those who have committed harms? And then, very importantly, restorative justice asks, is it possible to bring these two parties together? Currently, we have the state in the middle, right? There's a prosecutor who speaks in the name of crime victims. The crime victim is usually left out of the process until maybe that victim's impact statement is being asked for at sentencing. So restorative justice tries to turn that on its head and say, no, right from the beginning, what would it mean to bring the person who was harmed and the person who caused the harm together? How might that work to make people whole, to bring about reconciliation in our communities? And so in the last 15 years or so, there's been the birth of programs that aim to do that. And they often go by names like victim offender dialogue, bringing together people who've been harmed and people who have caused harm, sometimes directly, right? The person who stole your car might be brought together with you. And sometimes it's a surrogate, either a victim surrogate or an offender surrogate, but trying to give the individuals who are directly impacted, give them an experience on the part of victims that might bring wholeness and recovery to them, that they feel that they can now go back in their life free of the baggage of having been victimized in some way. And for the offender, the person who's caused the harm, perhaps a cathartic moment, right? Perhaps an opportunity for them to apologize and to hear maybe that they have been forgiven, or at least that they're not being demonized or being identified solely with this one bad thing that perhaps they've done wrong. So restorative justice has been making great strides in bringing victims and offenders together, in encouraging those directly involved in criminal offenses to tell their stories, and to seek an alternative from the prison system and the criminal justice system that we've known now for most of our lifetimes, something that's really focused on finding who did it and then dealing out punishment to them, very often the most harsh kind of punishment possible. So, so Project Rebound at San Francisco State, I hope that you can see some connections in there with restorative justice, that it tries to attend to the needs of folks who've committed harm. So asking, what is it that got you into crime? And very often we notice that people who are in prison are folks who come from minoritized and racialized communities, communities of color, communities of low income. And more often than not, folks who come into prison, they're adults, and yet they do not have a high school diploma. Usually they don't read even at high school levels. Educational attainment tends to be very low. So when we ask the question about what is it that caused the person to find themselves in this situation where apparently they've made some decisions to violate the law and perhaps even bring harm to others, there's always the question, what is it about the individual? And then what is it about the broader social conditions, right? The school systems, the economic systems, the systems of social justice or racial justice within a society. What contributing factors, along with an individual making a choice, right? What contributing factors led to this event, right? The commission of a crime, the creating of a victim. So Project Rebound looks into those issues directly by inviting formerly incarcerated people into communities of care and concern, communities of inquiry, where people can have a chance to look over their lives and get into dialogue about what brought them to this moment. Project Rebound also gives this chance for folks to make amends, essentially, by investing in themselves through education, and then by investing in their community by work that they do while students and then in careers after their studies have been completed at the university. And so now this brings us, and I'll wind up here in a moment, this brings us to the Center for Restorative Justice. The Center for Transformative Justice. So restorative justice very often finds itself criticized for trying to restore, right? So to move backwards from the present moment to some moment in the past that is thought to be more desirable. Well, certainly in some ways this makes sense, right? If you've had your house burglarized, you'd be happy to go back to that moment prior to the burglary, right? And not have your window broken and not have some of your things removed. So on the individual level, yes, it makes sense. On a broader social level, very often folks think it doesn't make much sense because it might be trying to suggest that returning to a prior moment, a moment where racism is permitted, or maybe a Jim Crow moment where institutionalized structural racism is legal, is something that is desirable or permitted. What moment might we move to in the past that we would hold up as a paragon of social justice, right? As our most desirable moment? And restorative justice critics say, none. There's never been a moment in American history that we'd really like to move back to be able to claim the maximum amount of freedom and liberation and opportunity for all Americans. What we need to do is to keep moving forward. And this is transformative justice, because transformative justice asks, what would it mean to move forward together? How can we look at the social context, the political context? How can we look at opportunities for equity, diversity, and inclusion? How can we look at these opportunities and work to maximize them? What would it mean for the operation of our criminal justice system if instead of being punitive, it was to be more of an open inquiry into the sources and the supports of criminality, of addiction, of failure to rehabilitate, and instead recidivate? So transformative justice is about asking these big questions, the big questions on the social level, the big questions on the structural level, and just as importantly, the big questions on the personal level, right? Who am I in all of this? Right? What is my role in all of this? And so folks who've been harmed by crime, folks who've found themselves committing crime, folks who are directly affected, say it's your family members who are in one of the other of those categories, or folks who are less directly infected in the community, right? Like we're taxpayers. There's certain places where we're happy to go to in the evenings and other places we might shy away from. What is our role in creating and perpetuating social conditions? So transformative justice looks to these issues, right? On the personal level, asking about what our role is, as well as on the structural and social and institutional levels. So thank you for your patience in listening to that perhaps quick and dirty introduction to restorative justice and transformative justice and the work of transformative justice on our campus, which is beginning with Project Rebound. And so now I'd like to invite Anthony and Sean to introduce themselves and tell something about their current work. And I'm not really doing so as a way for them to give their opinions about transformative justice so much. I've invited them here because, in my understanding, their lives are an embodiment of transformative justice. So, to the extent that Anthony and Sean, you feel comfortable talking about your life and your work these days, or in past days, since both of you have been involved in this type of liberation work for many years, to the extent that you're comfortable discussing these things with people, then you're invited to do so. And so maybe as a current student, we'd go with Anthony first and then Sean after, if that sounds all right.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Alan. I'm Anthony Williams. I'm ex-gang member, ex-criminal. Uh, I grew up in housing projects in Watts. I mean, I joined the gang at the age of 14, committed a crime at the age of 18. I was sent to prison for a life sentence. I found my authentic self, my true self, as I like to say, in 2009, after 13 years of roaming around a prison yard. A lot of unanswered questions for myself personally, is trying to figure out some things. Became very curious, found the love and the passion again for school and learning things. One of my mentors, when I was locked up, pushed me to go back to school and get my GED. So I did that, and that started this snowball effect of me trying to figure out where did my life trajectory lead me to where I was in prison. And I felt like I didn't belong there, like something else. Like this couldn't be the end of my story. Uh, I was given a second chance in life through the parole board after receiving my GED and going through some groups and working on myself a little bit more. I paroled in 2016 after doing 21 years and a little bit more than that. I moved to San Diego on my own, no family, no anything. But I did want to pursue, because I was taking college courses when I was locked up. I did want to pursue completing my AA degree. So I attended Mesa College with the hopes of transferring into San Diego State. I was in communication with Project Rebound a little bit when I was incarcerated. Didn't know a whole lot about it. I just knew it was a safe place for people that's been justice impacted to be around like-minded people. And they had a place at the CSUs where people that did believe in change, I mean, the chancellor of the CSUs and everybody who gave us opportunity to have a space. Um, so I got my AA degree from Black Studies at Mesa College, transferred to San Diego State in the fall of 2019 in the pursuit of a bachelor's in social work. I'm a senior right now. This is my last year. It's the most hardest year, but for me and my struggles of being African American or a Black person that's on the campus where you sometimes don't see familiar faces. You know, there's a lot of struggles dealing with them. Um, just not seeing some people that you might not be able to like identify with sometimes. You know what I mean? So those things allow me to just push a little bit harder and try to make sure that I can pave a way maybe for somebody that's coming up that's inside of gang life and see that, you know what I mean, that you can do it. You don't have to go through a 20-year prison sentence. So I would like to think that I'm blazing a path for them to be able to see the hope, and that hope is there that you can do it. But I'm grateful to have Project Rebound and all the students and administration, everybody that's there, and I appreciate everybody coming and just kind of get some insight into it because it's really a good program that allows, like I said, to be around people that you feel like get you because sometimes you feel out of place sometimes, and there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes into there. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I'm very long-winded when it comes to change because Alan know I get very excited and pumped up and talking about just, overcoming adversities and resilience. So I'll throw it over to Sean and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Anthony, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. I definitely appreciate hearing your history and seeing where you're at today. So to share some about myself, I grew up in Riverside County. There was a gang in my neighborhood too, so I was familiar with gangs and drugs. I was using drugs from the age of 12 to 15 years old. When I was 15 years old, some older kids in the neighborhood committed a murder. I was charged with it under the felony murder rule. So I was tried as an adult and sentenced to life in prison for a crime that occurred when I was 15 years old. So basically, going into the system at that young age, I just had to survive because I'd be there for the entirety of my life. So my main focus was once I started reading and learning like Malcolm X's story when he did I believe he did 10 years and he earned a master's degree. So starting out young in juvenile hall and reading stories like that, I knew myself that just because I was going to prison didn't mean that crime was going to be the defining factor in my life and criminal wasn't going to be the defining label for my life. So I made a point to just continue to educate myself. And it wasn't easy because the system didn't provide that to somebody convicted of murder coming in as a youth. I spent my first 9 years on high security level 4 yards. I started off on a 180 yard. I wasn't even supposed to be there, but the system didn't care too much. So my first experience with college wasn't until I transferred to Donovan's level 2 facility. And when I say college, I mean face-to-face college because the correspondence was available at the other institutions I was at, but I kept running into the problem where the correctional officers who worked R&R would send my textbooks back. So I would get the chrono, I would be approved for my college courses. I would spend $200 on textbooks while I'm in prison, and then just to have my books rejected at R&R. So it was discouraging, but in 2017, I transferred to San Diego's local prison, RJ Donovan, and they had the level 2 Echo facility. And that year, Southwestern College goes in there and they brought a face-to-face courses. So I was able to start off my college career and I earned half of my degree in there with a 4.0. And I also met Project Rebound because that's a facility Project Rebound comes into. I was lucky and fortunate to meet Alan Mobley. Professor Alan Mobley was coming onto our facility. And not only was he there just giving us inspiration, considering he served 10 years himself and he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term and was able to get himself released through the courts. And that's similar to how I was released. I had to rely on a judge because the parole board denied me 7 years when I was allowed to go to the board eventually. And I had to rely on the courts to get out. So when Alan would come in, he would create this great hope and projects. And basically he was giving us a future because a lot of guys on that facility down here in San Diego are sentenced to life sentences, some life without parole. But what Project Rebound and even Southwestern College provides is just hope for your future. And not just theoretical hope, but tangible hope and progress. Because Project Rebound with a group on the facility created the Starlight Peace Project, where we gathered in the middle of the yard and over 200 of us incarcerated there, sentenced to life, were holding up candles and we spelled out no violence on the yard. And it was basically a community organizational gathering that was inspired from Project Rebound. So SDSU's influence reaches into our institution and it's huge because in my case, I was lucky enough to be released in February of this year. And the way it impacted me directly is just by knowing Project Rebound, I had a reason to come to campus. And as soon as I came to campus, I met Krista Hughes from Wesley House, which is where I now live and am employed at Wesley House. So that wouldn't even have been a possibility without my connections to Project Rebound. And also just the future goals I get to set now and have for myself by knowing that I can transfer into SDSU through Project Rebound and continue to make living amends to the community. Because just because I didn't physically commit the murder that happened in my neighborhood didn't mean I wasn't a part of crime in my neighborhood and I didn't have that mentality and I didn't have to grow through the struggles myself of criminal thinking. So now, I'm employed by Wesley SDSU. I volunteer with Project Rebound. Every chance I get, I apply to transfer in for the fall of 21. And today I got to go work with Urban Street Angels and Project Aware. And we got to work with the youth this morning and run an exercise group. So things like that, I don't even know if they would have been possible if I would have never met Alan. Project Rebound, it just, the future would have been a lot different because upon my initial release before reaching out to Project Rebound, my parole officer, I was transient in Riverside County. They didn't want to let me transfer to San Diego. So it was really my educational connections that got me transferred out here. And it would be hard to imagine a successful transition for me without Project Rebound and this opportunity. So I love you, San Diego, and thank you everybody for being a part of this today.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah. When Sean's talking about us from Project Rebound at SDSU going into the local prisons and jails here, I think that I haven't yet mentioned that Project Rebound did expand from San Francisco State, right, all the way down here to SDSU, but also to another 8 campuses in between. And over the last year and a half, now we're at 14 campuses within the CSU system, and all the rest, I think, of the CSU campuses are in some stage of applying to also join Project Rebound. And so as a consortium, right, as a whole, we have the ability now to go into every California state prison and county jail and tell incarcerated students or people who are thinking about becoming students what awaits for them, right, outside, not just as it has been traditionally, right, an overworked parole officer and few community resources and a very high likelihood of returning to custody. You may have heard that the recidivism rate for people getting out of California state prisons is over 80%, right? Nearly everybody goes back within 10 years. In the first few years, it's about half that go back. But if you track people for up to a decade, it's nearly everyone recidivates. I mean, that's the way it's been in the past. But Project Rebound is aiming to reverse that. And something that I think is really important to remark upon or to underline is, Project Rebound was started by a formerly incarcerated person, right? It arose out of a movement to struggle for human rights, right? The Prisoners Union, that same energy that produced a Prisoners Union in California also produced Project Rebound. So when we talk about the evolution from restorative justice to transformative justice, right? To not try to take us back, but to take us forward, I think it's very important to acknowledge that the framework of transformative justice comes from communities that are under assault. We've heard recently from the Occupy movement, folks who feel that their communities are under assault from capitalism, right? From the radical disparities in wealth and income inequality, right, in our country. We've heard from the Me Too movement, right? People, and particularly women, who feel themselves under assault from a system that permits patriarchy. And now, most recently, we hear, very strongly from the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that Black lives and that all lives, obviously, but that Black lives in this moment are precious and important and need to be acknowledged by the broader community. So the criminal justice system, many feel, is in need of very serious reform, and transformative justice is one of these reforms, right? Coming straight from the people who are most directly affected by it, and the ethos around the reform is harm reduction, right? How can we attend to issues of harm in a non-violent way? So I think that Anthony and Sean both have practical lived experience of asking that same question, right? Here I am finding myself in a violent situation, right? A violent environment, an environment that's ruled by violence, right? A prison yard. And, don't get me wrong, when I say the environment ruled by violence, I'm not just talking about things like prison gangs. Picture in your mind's eye the prison, right? With walls around it, barbed wire, electrified fences, guard towers with people with guns, dining halls where there's a catwalk above where a guard is walking along with a gun looking down at you, right? The entire environment is dominated by coercion and threats of violence. So it goes way beyond things such as prison gangs. And so if you're in that situation and you're trying not to be a gang member, right? You're trying not to be someone who is following an ethos of violence, but instead trying to walk the walk of nonviolence, right? How do you do it, right? Like, can it be done? So transformative justice is an exploration, no silver bullet, right? But an exploration into asking these questions, right? What does it mean to practice nonviolence? And so perhaps Anthony and Sean, you could give your thoughts or some of your experiences about that, right? How do you practice nonviolence in an environment that that is dominated by coercion and by violence, seemingly from all sides?
It's that's the like a touchy thing for me, because I remember seeing George Floyd and then seeing everything with the Black Lives Matter and everything that's going on right now. And I'm really grateful that now we're having these discussions, because my whole life has been filled with that. I mean, and it wasn't my choice, you know what I mean? It was, you know, not playing the blaming game, but, you know, growing up in an environment where you're taught that violence solves problems. I mean, you think about, you know, I mean, I remember watching Western movies, and it's like you'd rather get caught with it than rather than caught without it. So it's like, okay, after the age of 10, I remember having to like carry sticks and bats and things like that just for protection from other people in the neighborhood, because it's like I would rather get caught from the police and have them take me to jail versus somebody trying to shoot me from wearing the wrong color or something like that. And that's one of the things I had to deal with, like on like the normal basis and just like basic survival. Now, being in my 40s, I look back on it and I remember I was working for a company and there was some shootings going on at a school, and they were coming in and everybody was acting real hysterical. And it was like, well, another shooting just took place at a school. And I was just like, I'm very empathetic towards that. And I'm like, this takes place at my school. It's the norm. Like a shooting, it's just like, it's one of those things where you just being grateful it's not you, but it's the norm of it happening. Where when I lost my grip on education at a young age, because it's like you have to pick and choose. You try to survive or you choose school. You choose school. It's almost like choosing the death. And it's like, okay, I'd rather choose this. And something Sean was talking about, the whole, you know, trying to educate yourself in prison, like it's not conducive. I mean, you have so many structures and things in there, and that's not really wanting to teach rehabilitation. It's not really wanting to see people, you know, whether it's from the monetary aspect or whether it's just from the control of the people and the bodies in there. And I struggle, just like Sean said too, was like trying to get books and trying to, you know, stay on course and, you know, ordering, you know, it's just so hard to try to find some type of change in those environments without any type of support, and then trying to be resilient. So violence is most definitely. I remember the first time I got into a fight at the age of like 12, and having one of the older my older guy brother, you know, pushing me back outside and making me fight. And after I got out there, and even though I got beat up, he took me and bought me like pizza and ice cream and stuff. So this reward system started to build in my head, where I started to think like, oh, okay, it don't really matter. You know what I mean? People look at this as something good, you know what I mean? But now looking at that now, it was very hard to take those things, unlearn those things, then learn how to walk away and learn how to look at things and say, you know what, I don't care what anybody thinks and everybody feels, and I'm gonna do what's right for me, because if I'm gonna get my butt kicked, and that's something for me. I can't speak for Sean, but I know I've got my butt kicked a lot of times in games, and I didn't kick people butts a lot of times in games. But I figure like if I'm gonna get my butt kicked, or I'm gonna kick somebody else, but I'd rather do it for something positive, because this is the way I want to think. Like I'm not gonna let a gang. I just said, you know what? I felt like I survived so much. I'm just gonna try to change my life in prison. And I didn't even know if I was gonna even be paroled. Like I had a life sentence. Like I didn't go to like think about going home. 'Cause when I got to prison in 1996, there were people that had been there 15 years ahead of me that wasn't going home. So I had been giving up on being released from prison. I was just roaming around a prison yard and having one of my best friends tell me, man, why are you always working in these janitorial positions, man? Why don't you try to show up for life? And I was like, what the hell are you talking about, show up for life? Like, I'm stuck in prison with a life sentence. He was like, why don't you try to help somebody else out and do something else? And I was just wondering what he meant by that. And he got me a job working as a gold coat in CMC East. And I started working with like a lot of older inmates that had Alzheimer's and dementia. And it started to make me get outside of myself, outside of my own head. Like, you know what? I may be stuck in prison, but I still can try to do some good to try to help somebody else that's less fortunate than me. And then it started to steamboat ahead. And I mean, I wouldn't be where I am right now if it wasn't for those experiences. And it's kind of crazy now because I still get collect calls from dudes I grew up with. And there's just like, man, we got your back, man. You're doing the right thing, man. Keep doing what you're doing, bro. And it's just like, I don't know, it's just like that reassurance. It makes me tear up sometimes just looking back, because I know it's a lot of my friends that have died behind a whole lot of like violence and stuff, but it feels good to see dudes that you grew up with that don't feel like they, soft to be able to see you and say, you know what, bro, you're doing a good thing, man. Keep pushing. We're proud of you. You know, don't come back to the hood and watch. Keep going to school. Keep doing what you're doing, and we cheering you on. So that feels good coming from the environment I came from. So yeah, I'll throw it over to Sean.
Yeah, so when you said GoCo, I worked at CMC East as a GoCo too. Like I remember going from B yard over to D yard to work. It was great. Favorite
That's
job.
what's
And stuff.
up.
Yeah, I had a flashback when you said that. So I mean, growing up in the neighborhood, I remember getting beat up like growing up every time I went outside until I started hanging out with the local gang. So fighting was a cultural norm in my neighborhood because your friends who you fought with, you just want to make sure if you fought somebody from another part of town, they weren't going to run away. So that was kind of how we developed like strength and comfort in that. So by the time I went to juvenile hall, what was traumatic for me is my co-defendant, he beat the homeowner to death. So, and he told me later in juvenile hall, I wasn't trying to kill him, I was trying to beat him so he couldn't remember. So that logic to me was insane, but it made a point in my life that I was never going to put my hands on somebody else again. Cause I was like, wow, something that was a norm in our community, such as beating people up, like you didn't think death resulted from that. He killed somebody doing that. So um, there's stats too on it. When you transfer from the juvenile to the adult system, I don't know the percentages, I don't have them in front of me, but like at a higher rate than the average population, when you transfer from juvenile hall, you're gonna get assaulted. So I got assaulted 3 times in my first year in the adult system. I got attacked in the day room because I got an extra tray and somebody got mad. And then because I'm Egyptian and white, and I grew up with a Crip gang. So the Crips in my day room were like, you want us to jump him out the pot? Like, what you want to do? He just attacked you for no reason. And I was telling them, like, because of what I learned, like in juvenile hall and the strength I got and that commitment to be nonviolent, I wasn't weak. I was exercising. So I felt like I could fight anybody, beat anybody up. But mentally, I felt like I had to overcome that because that's not what I wanted for myself. So I went out to the day room and I would have fought him if it would have came to that. But I wanted to show strength and humbleness. So I approached him at a table, sat down next to him, like, I was like, hey, why'd you do that? And that messed him up anyway. So that was more of an assault to him than punching him, was just questioning him because it shows strength. I'm strong enough to ask you why you did that, not even get you jumped out of the day room. So it was healthy for me to do that because I learned myself that I had the power to do that. And the next assaults I faced, I got jumped by the Southsiders. Like there was no apologizing to them. We just got separated to different housing units. But later on in prison, I just had to make a point of being nonviolent. Sometimes it's impossible because you'll get cellies that, I mean, they just want to fight, and then you can fight in the cell. So I did have cell fights. I never had public fights out in the on the yard. But one of the things that I learned, one of the greatest lessons I learned that I took to prison with me was being genuine. When you're authentic and you're real with your people and the people on the yard, and you don't run around like talking about I'm violent, I'll whip somebody's butt, you get respect for that. So you get respect for being genuine. So I felt like I had a lot of respect on every yard I've been at because I respected all the other people who we know we could fight people, we know we can harm people, but that's not what we're promoting. We're actually promoting, we all want the same things. We want to get our visits, we all want to have good cellies, we want positivity. It's just violence does happen in prison. So I was lucky to survive it by having a lot of cell violence and not public violence. So I didn't get a bunch of write-ups for violence. I felt like cell violence was healthier because we didn't tell on each other and eventually we got cell moves. But yeah, so my last 3 years in prison, again, I was at that level 2. When I was at CMC, that was my first prison where I got to express my nonviolence. On the level 4 yard, I didn't even say that because the automatic go-to there is if somebody hits you, like basically you're supposed to stab them because that's kind of the go-to on the level 4, just stabbing people, no fighting. But when I went to the level 3, I would tell people who would come to me with trying to do violence, like, hey, this dude did this, we need to jump him off the yard, or we got to stab this dude, he burnt somebody for money. I would speak up and be like, wait a minute, like we have all these great conversations about how you want to be nonviolent, go to the board and go home. But then when something happens, you're letting other people convince you that you need to do this violent act. And I'm lucky that some institutions exist like CMC East where I can verbalize that without getting jumped off the yard. Because if I would have verbalized that on a different institution, such as level 4, I could have got jumped off the yard for that. So when I went to that level 2, I took it an extra notch. I was giving out hugs on my last 3 years in prison. I wasn't doing no fighting. I didn't care what you called me. People were still violent there because you can get away with it on that level 2. Like there was a lot of violence that happens behind the scenes, but even behind the scenes, I offered hugs to anybody. And what was so great is that it transitioned to the community because I've been on public transportation, I've been in transitional housing where I've had confrontations, and I just offered a person a hug. Like that disarms them a lot of the times. And I mean, it's great and healthy for me. So that's just my experience with violence and expression of it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to open it up and see if people have questions that you can put in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. Something I'd like to underline right now is both Anthony and Sean are speaking a lot about the community, right? About what went on living in the community before going to prison, and then things that are still going on in various communities out here. So when we think about violence, when we think about harm reduction, when we think about alternatives to committing more violence, it's far from just a prison situation, right? It's a community situation. And for our students at San Diego State, many of them are growing up in the same kind of circumstances, right? We have many racialized and minoritized students in particular, and people of low income, first generation college students come from neighborhoods and from environments that are not a lot different than what Sean and Anthony are both describing. And so as a professor in the criminal justice program since 2005, I've been hearing from students all these years that they want to give back, that they feel very fortunate that they've made it to SDSU. As I say, usually it's the first time that someone in their family has been able to make it to a 4-year institution. And what they want to do is graduate and go on to a career path that will enable them to give back to their community. And they really struggle in wondering what is a viable career path that they can take to give back to their community, right? Something that gives them dignity and purpose and meaning, and gives them a living wage, gives them healthcare benefits, perhaps gives them a pension or some kind of retirement package, and still enables them to give back to the community. What can they do? And so many find themselves drawn to law enforcement, right, or criminal justice as a career, not necessarily because they want to wear badges and have guns and be part of a coercive system of violence and control over people. That's not necessarily what they want, but they struggle in defining what sort of vehicle can enable them to achieve their life goals, right, to serve their families, serve themselves and their neighborhoods, and contribute to the broader society. So something that the Center for Transformative Justice really is about is helping to identify what these other career paths are. And something that's really emerging that both Anthony and Sean have given some voice to is the role of mentors. So we're really, I think, coming into an era supported by notions of restorative justice and transformative justice, that folks with lived experience in the justice system can be employed as mentors, peer navigators, and advisors for prevention efforts, right? To prevent young people or others from committing crimes and going into the justice system, but also preventing recidivism or the reintroduction back in the justice system. Now we have plenty of people, right, with this lived experience of success, mostly they've had to do it on their own. There are some groups like us now that are supporting these great individual efforts. But what we strive for in the future is to be more coordinated and more organized in providing the type of mentorship and support that people who are at that tough spot of wondering, are they going to go this way or that way, that they can receive the support to keep them moving according to their higher aspirations. So just wanted to say that, and I'll take a look at the chat.
Look like asked about the textbooks and look like Dr. Terman Collins. Yeah, the textbooks, they don't have no, you have to order your own textbooks, but it comes to like you gotta order them from Amazon the same way you do it like everybody else does, but it still have to like go through R&R, go like on the list. And then they play games with it. It's like you have to like wait on it to come, and then you can't have hardback copies. So if it comes as a hardback copy, it's like you can't have it. And then sometimes you can like tell them some of this basic is you can go and be like, okay, if I can't have the hardback, can you just rip it off and give me the pages? No, I'm gonna send the whole thing back. But they want to send it back still. They still, it's like they don't really understand education from like so many different aspects. And then I mean, it trickles out into being on parole. I mean, I spent 21 years in prison, and when I got out, you know, my parole officer was so much on my butt about getting a job. I was like, dude, I'm going to school full time. This is going to, like, no, you need a job right now. I'm violating your parole. I had to literally do full-time school and then full-time work. I was literally getting off a bus, running with a backpack from work, showering, run back to the bus stop, get on the bus for like 2 hours before I got a car, because I was like, I have to do both. So it's like no, I want to know, for the lack of a better word, I'll just use the word that I know people, you know, throw around those environments. For the lack of respect for education, they don't really like, they don't look at it as like a means of getting better, you know, a better job, when we all know that education increase your socioeconomic status on so many levels that, but it's hard for them to see that because they don't believe in change. So I'm just glad to have programs that like support that, when you can just be like, hey, even being at San Diego State, it's like, when you say I'm a Project Rebound student and any other CSUs, it's like people get it, you know what I mean? I'm so grateful for John Irwin, you know, having that idea, you know what I mean, to try to create a space for us. Like, I'm so honored because it just reminds me as a kid when people say, you know what I mean, you have a thought and you put that thought to put some, you know, uh some power behind it, or put some methods behind it, that you can do anything. And he created this space, and I'm grateful for him creating this space, because I wouldn't be here right now without him. I'll let Sean add something to that.
Well, let's see what's Jennifer Gomez has a question or comment.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to thank Sean for inviting me to this. This has been wonderful, and I really commend you all for this program that you guys have, and for Anthony and Sean for speaking about your stories. So I met Sean actually at Southwestern College through the Restorative Justice program, and I'm currently at UCSD. And they have a Underground Scholars Initiative program, which is kind of like the similar program, but based at the UC system. But we don't seem as developed as you guys are. So I was really excited to hear about all the things that you guys are doing at the state level. And one of the things I just wanted to mention is that something that we're working on to try to help the situation is we're trying to get a major or minor in critical carceral studies at UC San Diego. But I would be really interested in talking to you, Professor Mobley, and Sean and Anthony and anyone else who would be interested in giving us some guidance, possibly, to show us how you guys are able to have that prison to education pipeline going, because that is something that we'd really like to work on at the UC system as well. Thank you.
Yay. Yeah, so I went to UC Irvine for my PhD after getting out of prison. They were very good to me over there. And we were working for a long time to try to get something like Project Rebound in the UC system. And so it was really terrific when folks from Berkeley were able to respond to outreach from San Francisco State saying, we'd like for you to join us. And so the folks at San Francisco State trained and supported the crew at Cal Berkeley, who were going to call themselves Project Rebound too, like us, but the CSU system wanted to keep that title just for the CSU. And so they developed their own name, Underground Scholars. And now, yeah, it's spreading from UC Berkeley to UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, UC Irvine, and now UCSD. So I don't think it'll be too long before all the UC campuses have it as well, just like the CSU campuses. So I noticed that that we never have enough time, and there's been so much harm caused in the name of criminal justice to so many people for so long that, that there's so much healing that needs to be underway. This has been, I think, a big theme in our country in recent months and years. I mean, obviously, we've seen it in the movements that I referred to earlier, and then in the election time where we're said to be and apparently are very much divided. So I'm hopeful that healing is the order of the day for now and into the future, and that we can work on healing ourselves and one another and our systems. We can work on these things together at every level. So for us here at the Center for Transformative Justice and with Project Rebound, we'll be working on these issues individually, collectively as a community, and then reaching out to all others who want to join us in this. So please send us an email at projectrebound@sdsu.edu. It's I'll write it in the chat, but that's just it. Project Rebound, one word. Project. I'm missing the letter. Project Rebound at sdsu.edu, and we're happy to respond and let you know how you can get involved. And Jennifer asks that if everybody could please take a moment with the evaluation on your way out, so that that this series can keep getting better. So thank you, Anthony and Sean. Thank you, Jennifer, for this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for coming and during your lunch hour or this part of your day and hearing about what we're up to. And finally, just thank you for your support. It was decades in coming that an institution like SDSU or an institution like the CSU could embrace something like Project Rebound and a Center for Transformative Justice to serve our students and serve our community. And that day is here. So congratulations to all of us, and let's keep paying it forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Anthony and Sean.